Hello and welcome to Topic 5, Lecture 1. And in this lecture, we are going to be learning about the difference between criminal law and civil law. So, what are we going to be covering in this lecture? We are going to be learning about the difference between criminal law and civil law. And those are two of the main categories of laws that we have in the United States. Now, in your textbook, they talk about different ways of classifying crimes, in particular, different types of crimes. And then also they talk about the differences between felony and misdemeanors. I'm going to leave it to you to read about the classification of crimes into the categories of felony, serious crimes, misdemeanors, less serious crimes. I'll leave that to you to read in the textbook. But this lecture is dedicated about learning the difference between criminal and civil law. So in modern America, laws govern many aspects of our life. And if you really just sort of think about everything that you did from the moment you maybe got up until you got in the car to go to work or to school, I mean, there are many laws that work on your person. So, for example, when you set your alarm and it rang at a certain time, the time itself is set by federal law, whether or not it's daylight savings time or whether it's standard time. When you get up and you eat your breakfast or drink some water, there are laws governing the purity of water. There are laws governing treaties between countries in terms of trade, and that can have an impact on your the cost of your breakfast. And then getting in your car and filling it up with gas and paying taxes on it. It almost goes without saying that laws really govern a lot of our lives. And so, laws govern our commerce and the economy. That the amount of money you get paid is oftentimes set by a minimum wage that's set by the federal government, but also commerce as well. Trade deals that we have impact the cost of goods. And so that deals with the legal treaties and other aspects of the economy having to do with labor laws and those sorts of things. All of that really is a reflection of the ways that laws govern our lives. Laws control our private relationships too. That when we think about family life, that whether you can adopt a child or not, the type of family that you can have. Right now, that marriage has to be between two humans. It can't be between three humans, right? And so that controls our life in that way. Laws also control how we settle a lot of disputes. So if we want to dissolve a marriage, there are laws regarding divorce and alimony and child support. And if you strike a contract, if you have a contract with somebody and they don't hold up their end of the bargain, laws will help us settle that dispute. And laws also control the relationship that individuals have with the government, right? And a lot of what we're going to be learning about with criminal law has a lot to do with that human's relationship with their government, because government often tells us the kinds of behaviors that we cannot engage in, right? That these sorts of behaviors are crimes, and if you engage in those sorts of behaviors, there's a consequence to be paid. So laws govern many aspects of our life. And you might be raising an angry fist going, laws, why so many? Why so much regulation? But as that quote says there, at the top from President John F. Kennedy, it says that certain other societies may respect the rule of force, but we respect the rule of law. And so, you could live in a society without laws, but often what that means is that means those who have the most power, have the most brute force, are the ones who impose their will on others. At least in theory, in a democratic society, we have laws, and it doesn't really have to do with how much power that an individual has. No individuals are above the law, and so they are subject to the law. And just because the government wants to have some sort of retribution on a group or an individual, it's not able to do that because it can't use its brute force in that way. It also must follow the rule of law. So there are two main categories of law: criminal law and civil law. So criminal law is defined by your textbook as the body of rules that define crimes, set out their punishments, and mandate the procedures for carrying out the criminal justice process, okay? And so criminal law, like it sounds, has to do with the defining of crimes and then, defining what happens when you engage in that prohibited behavior, and also some rules to follow when pursuing a case against an individual who is engaged in a crime. Now, everything else is civil law. So all law that isn't criminal is considered civil. So what does that mean? Well, civil law are the set of rules that outline how to deal with disputes that arise between private individuals or between organizations or between a private individual and an organization, okay? So criminal law is the individual versus the state, okay? Criminal law is like public law, right? Because it's like the individual has engaged in an action that the public deems to be criminal, okay? And so it's individual versus state. Civil law, it's individual versus individual or corporation versus corporation. Civil law is more of a private matter. It's settling disputes between private individuals, settling disputes between private corporations, okay? So let's dig in and get even a better sense of these differences. Okay, so let's start with criminal law. So you can see from that definition, there's a lot of things going on in that definition of how we define criminal law. And the two main differences within that definition and the two main categories within criminal law is what is known as substantive criminal law and procedural criminal law. And let me just put those both up there so that we can, just sort of take a look at them. So substantive criminal law has to do with the substance of criminal law, okay? And in other words, the substance is what defines a behavior as a crime, and also the substance of what happens when you engage in that crime. So substantive criminal law is the branch of law that defines crimes within state statutes or federal code or city ordinances and defines what their punishment is going to be. On the other side is what's known as procedural criminal law, because as the name suggests, it deals with the procedure that's associated with the pursuit of criminal offenses. And so procedural criminal law are the laws that set out the basic rules of practice in the criminal justice system, okay? So, for example, basic rules of practice. What are the rules? What are the laws governing an arrest? What needs to be in place? It needs to be probable cause, right? A person needs to be read their rights. Laws are in place regarding how many members need to be on a jury. Laws are in place regarding the powers of the prosecutor, okay? Laws are in place saying that anybody who is charged with the crime must be afforded an attorney for their defense. All of that falls into the category of procedural criminal law. So let's see now if we can differentiate between substantive criminal law and procedural criminal law. All right, so let's test your understanding of the difference between substantive and procedural criminal law. Okay, so classifying aggravated assault as a felony. Is that an example of substantive or procedural criminal law? If you said substantive, you're correct, right? Because it is telling us about the substance of the crime. Aggravated assault is a serious crime, and therefore it is classified as a felony. What about a person is found guilty by a jury has a right to one appeal? Is that substantive or procedural? Well, it's procedural because it's telling us that there is a particular procedure that needs to be followed, a legal procedure, and that's that if you are found guilty, everybody has a legal right to one appeal. All persons charged with a crime that could result in incarceration have a right to counsel and an attorney. Now, I gave this example, right? And that is an example of procedural criminal law. The punishment for auto theft is 20 to 36 months. Procedural or substantive? Substantive, why? Because it is telling us about the substance of the punishment, right? that this is what happens if you steal cars. How about a person failed to pay his rent for 3 months and is being evicted? Is that substantive criminal law? Is it procedural criminal law? Both? Neither? Well, it is kind of a trick question. It's neither. A person that gets evicted for failing to pay their rent, that's not a crime, okay? That is a breach of contract. And so it's not an example of criminal law, but it's an example of civil law. So let's go ahead and learn about what civil law is. Okay, so let's refresh our memories on what the definition of civil law is. It is the set of rules outlining how to deal with disputes that arise between private individuals and organizations. It's also the failure to carry out a legal duty. So let's look at specific types of civil disputes and some examples of civil resolution. So these are the most common types of civil disputes. One is a breach of contract, okay? So like the example I used with the landlord, when you rent an apartment from a landlord, you're engaging in a contract. And so basically the landlord is saying, hey, these are the things that I'm going to provide for you: a place to live, heat, shovel your sidewalk, whatever it may be. And in exchange, you, the tenant, will do these certain things, right? Pay rent at this time, et cetera, et cetera. And then, if one person fails to end up their end of the bargain, if the tenant fails to, pay their rent, or if the landlord fails to, provide a proper upkeep of the residence, then the contract is, violated. And then you could go to court to decide, well, who is the responsible party for the breach of that contract. A breach of fiduciary duty. And so you might hire somebody to manage your money, to protect your property, and that you have a contract with them, and they agree to make decisions in the best interest of your stock portfolio or what have it, whatever it may be. And if they fail to do that, right, if they fail to live up to making decisions that benefit you, and instead they're making decisions that benefit their company, that could be a breach of fiduciary responsibility, and that would be a dispute that could be resolved in civil court. Negligence, failure to exercise care. And so if you hire somebody to come and take care of your dog, and then for a week, and then they don't feed it, they don't walk it, anything, and then the dog gets sick or die, you could sue them for negligence. Now, keep in mind, a lot of these, the fiduciary responsibility, you sort of see with the recent cryptocurrency trial, that you could sue somebody for a breach of fiduciary duty, but a person could also be criminally charged for fraud, right? And so that sometimes there's overlap between criminal and civil law. The same is true with negligence, right? And as we'll see in a moment, engaging in negligent behavior can oftentimes be criminal. And defamation. So defamation is saying something that is false in order to harm somebody's character. Slander is when you're saying it, and libel is when you are writing it. And we just had a huge defamation civil suit against Fox News regarding the Dominion voting machines. Okay, and they lost that civil case, and they had to pay big monies to Dominion. Examples of civil resolution: no criminal sanctions. Okay, if you're not found guilty in civil when you are sued, or that you're found to be either responsible or not responsible. And then if you're found responsible, you don't go to jail. Okay, there's no criminal sanction. Your liberty is not taken from you. But you might be asked to pay for damages. So if you breach a contract and it causes damage to somebody, you might be asked to pay for the damage. You might be asked to complete the contract. But keep in mind that there is no criminal sanction, no loss of liberty or rights, and then there is no incarceration. So you might be wondering, hey, Professor Hankinson, why are we learning about civil law when this is really a class on criminal justice and therefore criminal law? Well, the reason that we're learning about it is because civil law is related to criminal law, and that civil law deals with, in part, personal injury, or what's known as tort law. Okay. And so, as I indicated in the other, um, in the past slide, that, a person can be charged with um, both a civil offense and a criminal offense. Okay. And so, that a person, when it comes to personal injury, such as a tort, a person can be charged with the crime of personal injury, causing personal injury, and they could also be sued by somebody for basically bringing about personal harm to their body. Now, keep in mind that this is not a violation of the Fifth Amendment's double jeopardy clause. The double jeopardy clause says that you can't be tried twice for the same crime. Well, this is not a violation of the double jeopardy clause. Why? Because you're not being tried twice for the same crime. You are being charged with a crime and you are being sued for, personal injury. Okay. One takes place in criminal court, one takes place in civil court. It's not a It's not double jeopardy. So the classic example of the personal injury and criminal law overlap is O.J. Simpson. Okay. And so the criminal case was the people of the state of California. So again, criminal cases are always against the state, versus Orenthal James Simpson. And as we know, he was charged with first-degree intentional homicide for killing his wife, Nicole Brown Simpson. And as we know, he was found not guilty. If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. And his team was successful in getting a not guilty verdict from the jury. Now, keep in mind, also another difference between civil and criminal law is the burden of proof, okay, or the evidentiary standard. The evidentiary standard in criminal cases is much higher. The evidentiary standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. And the reason is because if you are found guilty, then really bad things can happen to you, right? Your liberty can be taken away. Your life can be taken away through the death penalty. And so you want to have a very high bar. So there's a high level of confidence that when a person is found guilty of a crime, that there's high level of confidence that that person is indeed guilty. That O.J. Simpson was also subject to a civil case. The parents of Nicole Simpson pursued a wrongful death civil suit against O.J. Simpson. And in that case, he was found to be responsible for the wrongful death. And you might be saying, well, how could he be found not guilty but found responsible in the civil case? And that in large part has to do with, well, there's many factors. But one factor is that in civil cases, the evidentiary standard is much lower. It's by a preponderance of the evidence, okay? And so in other words, when you look at the evidence, the vast majority or most of the evidence indicates that O.J. Simpson was responsible for her death. And so it's a lower evidentiary standard. And it's lower because the criminal sanctions are different. Your liberty cannot be taken away. But as we know that O.J. Simpson was instructed by the court to pay significant damages to Nicole Simpson's parents. And, he ended up selling memorabilia, which led to his other criminal case, in order to, raise the funds to pay that the damages suit. So, good example of how the overlap between criminal and civil law. All right, so I want to draw your attention to the concept chart or summary that is in your textbook. And it does a really good job of comparing criminal and tort law. And so the similarities, let me put my magic pen on. The similarities are on this side and the differences are on this side. We're not going to read through this, but feel free to pause the video or to take a look at it in the textbook because it's a really, really handy summary. Okay, so let's end this lecture by testing our knowledge and seeing whether or not that the following is primarily a civil or a criminal matter. So, marriage and divorce, is that primarily a matter of civil law or criminal law? Well, for the most part, it is civil law, okay? Because marriage and divorce are about a contract, about a marital contract, and then the failure to uphold that contract. The copyright violation, is it civil or criminal? Well, copyright violation is both. Um, that you can sue somebody for taking your intellectual property from you without your permission. But there are also federal laws and regarding a violation of copyright. And so you could be criminally charged as well. A car accident really depends on the situation. That if you, let's say you're in a car and you back end somebody, and that, but there's no, criminal or traffic offense that you engaged in. You're not drunk, right? You weren't recklessly driving. You weren't really going over the speed limit. There's probably going to be no criminal offense associated with that. However, the person's whose car you banged into could sue you for personal damages, right? Under a tort. Identity theft is both. You could sue somebody for invasion of privacy, but that identity theft is also a public offense. It's a criminal offense. Denied unemployment. What do you think about that? Let's say you get fired from your job and then you go in and you try to get unemployment and it's denied. Is that criminal or civil? That's going to be a civil matter, right? That you would, make an argument that the unemployment board, somehow treated you unfairly in denying you this, and so you could sue the unemployment board. How about a confession beaten out of a person in police custody? Well, that is both a criminal offense and a civil offense. So that law enforcement can be charged under federal law for engaging in that kind of behavior. That's a prohibition under federal law and some state law as well. But a person who is beaten by a cop could also sue them for bodily damages in a civil case as well, seeking damages. Okay. All right. So hopefully you did well on that. All right. That's it for me on lecture 1. In the next lecture, we are going to be learning about the elements of the crime. So thanks for paying attention and listening. I appreciate it, and I will talk to you again soon.